lecture on biodiversity for environmental impact assessment. Let's see how we go here. Okay, what we're going to do is talk about biodiversity as our first topic, an important topic in EIA. We'll look at, I might get onto the condition setting process to see how we go for that. Okay, what's biodiversity? I guess we kind of understand intuitively what biodiversity means, and we need to get our head around it from a decision-making point of view, because it's not just good enough just to understand, have a conceptual idea of what it is. We need to understand what it is from a policy context. In effect, in EIA, if we want to kind of make it as crude as possible, it really means no impact on what we call the crown jewels. In other words, if you're proposing to put a mine in a national park, for example, then you're most likely going to know. Of course, there are exceptions to that. What are the crown jewels? We talk about use the word environmentally significant here, and also its sensitive areas to talk about that. These often are fatal floor issues for EIA, as we said. Typically, if we want to categorise these, there are the conservation reserves, national parks, nature reserves, marine parks, and so on. Certain other vegetation which is not reserved, these are the ones that are typically rare and endangered type vegetations. Many wetlands which are not reserved are still considered to be in pristine state. These will be considered to be crown jewels. The coastal foreshore area in particular is considered to be important, and things like benthic habitats. There's a special different rule for benthic habitats, which I'll get to as we go through that particular coral and seagrass, but also mangrove as well, which I've mentioned there. As well as that, habitats which are subject to international treaties, which means in of themselves they may not be significant, but they are habitats for example, migratory species, and they become important because of that. Clearly declared rare species, communities and habitats will be important as well. Let's think about biodiversity from the bigger picture perspective. 2010 was a particularly important year for biodiversity. It was the International Year of Biodiversity as declared by the United Nations and the Environment Programme Union. If we define, get a head around what we mean by biodiversity, here's a definition from the Commonwealth Government. It's the biological diversity is the variety of all life forms on Earth. It's different plants, animals, microorganisms, their genes, the terrestrial, marine, freshwater ecosystems, of which they are part. So you can see it's quite a broad definition. It talks about individual species, clearly plants and animals, but also their ecosystems which make it up. That's a good starting point, but from a decision-making perspective, it doesn't give us kind of good clues to what we're actually talking about here. It's also important to understand that biodiversity is not a static thing. It's not about preservation, it's about conservation. In effect, we manage for change. It's a bit tricky when we talk about human-induced change, for example, climate change, but natural change is what we actually manage for. So we're not putting a kind of cone of silence, as it were, around the whole thing. As I said to you, humans can accelerate the process. So we have to manage, in terms of biodiversity, manage that change, and I'll talk briefly about that here as well. Things like synthetic chemicals can actually be introduced and actually accelerate some of those change processes. Things like herbicides and pesticides will impact on non-target species as well. Okay, from the decision-making point of view, this impacts on EIA. We talk about biodiversity at 3 levels. First of all, we talk about ecosystem diversity. This is the most commonly used one, and the one which is easiest for us to get a head around, which is looking at the broad communities and their processes which go with that. I'll talk about that in a minute with you as well. Species diversity is important, which is the variety of different species, so we can protect ecosystems, but we also need to make sure those ecosystems protect the range of species that we're interested in. And then we have genetic diversity as well. This is important given that you might have a particular species represented over a range of different climatic areas. Therefore, it's important to protect each of those climatic areas because there will be genetic diversity within a particular species. Getting a head around what we mean by ecosystems is pretty straightforward. We understand a rainforest is quite different from this sort of thing. That's Mount Azure. Area near the coast there, rain is obviously a big factor in all of that. We can think about conifer forests, tundra, deserts, typically the African type deserts, they're semi-arid, they're quite different, and of course coral reef. These are things we can get a head around as to what it is, but we need better and more scientific than kind of a conceptual idea. And I'll talk about how we do that, particularly in Western Australia and the small coastal plain. Species diversity is important as well. It's not about protecting bacterias. These are different bacteria species. We need to protect each type of bacteria as well, whether it be something from Albinia, which is one here, Coccinia, this one here, these are two from the Blue Mountains, and then, these ones here are from the swamp coastal plain. That's a swamp bacteria, one that one there. Okay, and also we need to protect, this is one of the genetic diversity. This is the same species of bacteria, which is Bacteria menzies. This is the typically flowering one, the kind of red, orange, yellow one. Whereas every now and again we get this one here, which is quite different. And we need to make sure that when we are thinking about what we're reserving, that we protect the range of diversity for a species like that. But of course, all species will have their variety. And those of you who understand ecosystems and biology and that kind of stuff, you'll understand the importance of diversity in that regard. Let's have a quick think about a broader view about why it's important to protect biodiversity. This is important because sometimes we have to convince decision makers about this. So we think about, first of all, the value of native vegetation, then we'll talk about the value of biodiversity in that regard. Clearly there's some direct economic benefits for protecting native vegetation. Wildflowers is an important industry. Firewood, you can get direct economic benefits from collection of firewood that we in developing countries like this, or in developed countries, there are still wood fuel burners that we have used here as well. Also, native vegetation, for example, wood is used in the building industry, so it's important as well. And not to forget the direct benefits from medicines. About 1 in 4 of our drugs these days directly comes from a natural substance. Often it's things like penicillins. This is an example of a natural fungus, and you can see growing on a petri dish. We've got scattered some bacteria on there. You can actually see this particular fungus produces a toxin which is deadly to that particular bacteria. And indeed, penicillin and the derivatives of penicillin comes from a naturally forming bacteria. So we do get direct benefits from that, and that's one of the reasons why it's important to keep our native vegetation, because we see we don't know what's out there, the possibilities for that. Recreational value is important from a recreational perspective. Ecotourism is in the Tarkine in Tasmania, one of the awards. And so the economy of Tasmania isn't the best, probably the worst in Australia, but one thing that one of the industries that does have is ecotourism. So and it's an important part of that. There's the importance of native areas, vegetation areas, which they habitat for things like bees, which naturally pollinate not just wildflowers but also our crops as well. Important to have native vegetation for control of erosion. You can see here on this diagram here, there's a fair bit of erosion going on here and over there. But when you have native vegetation nearby as a natural wind break, it actually stops that occurring. So this is up in the Geraldton area, particularly affected by sea breezes. So farmers use it as a natural control against erosion. Scientific value, these are thrombolites from Lake Clifton. These particular ones here, they're limestone structures. You can see, let's go back a bit better. Over here, these are limestone structures you can see over here. They're actually made by bacteria. These ones are about 5,000 years old, but they are exactly the same as the original form of life on Earth, going back a couple of billion years, with the stromatolites. They're actually constructed by algae, and therefore, for that reason alone, there are enough scientific value for that. We also talk about ecosystem services that are provided by areas of native vegetation, not the least of which is production of oxygen, cleansing of the air and water. Trees actually increase rainfall because they actually cycle the water as it falls. It transpires through the air again and then forms clouds, and actually goes further inland when you have the presence of forests. So it actually increases the spread of rainfall that goes on. Flood mitigation is an important part, particularly of coastal vegetation, things like mangroves, and the example is obviously Cyclone Katrina, which is, I think, 2006, remember, or 2005, it hit New Orleans. And what you can see quite clearly is that these areas here in front of New Orleans, the mangroves were completely cleared, whereas the areas over here have mangroves associated with them. These areas were less flood impacted than New Orleans. There's all sorts of issues about levees and all that kind of thing understanding that if there were mangroves there in front of New Orleans, then the impact of the storm surge cyclone would have been less strong in that regard. So it's important for that. We also talk about the native vegetation actually increases the soil fertility, it recycles nutrients in that. Things like acacia species, when you get a fire or clear vegetation, the acacia species are the first species to come in, and they're very good at trapping nitrogen back into the soil, so they're important for that as well. They do detoxify chemicals in the atmosphere, so it's an important part of that. And not the least of which is it actually stabilises our Earth's climate as being a carbon sink. So it keeps the level of carbon dioxide fairly stable, therefore our climate is stable because of that, generally speaking. So we go from native vegetation to biodiversity. So, from a single species of plants to having a diversity. Why should we? So we can make an argument for why native vegetation is important, but why is biodiversity important? There are the kind of less tangible things like spiritual and emotional relaxation, that kind of point of view. It's more relaxing, I suppose, for humans to actually recreate or relax in an area which is more natural and has more diversity to it, more interesting in that regard. Things like amenity, that a single species pine forest is less visually pleasing and from a landscape perspective less important than an area of forest which has a different variety of things as well. And then there's the issue about, well, we should protect these things for their own sake. This notion that these species, whether it be dolphins or whatever, have a right to exist as well. These are less tangible things we talk about as well. And I said earlier that having a diverse ecosystem as opposed to one which is single species, and we protect those, we should protect it. If we simply, from an economic perspective, we simply don't know what's in there. In most of these areas, if you look at Australia, probably 45 to 50% of the species are actually unknown, and we haven't actually worked out what they are and what they do. And that goes for both flora and fauna. And so we simply don't know what's actually in these and what economic value they can provide for us. It's a very selfish way of looking at it, but it's not a bad way to think about it in terms of when you're talking with decision makers and bureaucrats and developers, these sort of things. That there's hidden, unknown value in these, and that's why we should protect them from that perspective. Just a kind of a bit of a side issue, but not really, is agricultural biodiversity. Why is that important? What we're discovering is that crop and livestock diversity is in decline, partly because of the desire to have, high efficiency crops, whether it be livestock or whether it be actual things like cereals. That these days the farmers tend to specialise in that particular species and a particular strain of a particular species as well. It's the most efficient and most productive of those. There is a problem with that, and in specialising rather than being diverse. If you look at some of the figures, that in the US, only 10% of the variety of crops that we had at the start of the 20th century is now being used. We've seen a 90% decline in the diversity of crops. China has lost nearly 90% of its traditional wheat varieties as well since World War II. And this is important not just because, from a kind of theoretical perspective, but we can look to history and we can see that things like the Irish potato famine came about because of reliance on one or two species of potatoes only in Ireland. And what we found there was that because there's only one or two species, when a disease went through, it wiped out pretty much all of the crop from that. So we need to be careful about reliance on that, on one or two species, because if we're relying on just wheat, a particular species of wheat as a staple diet, if all of a sudden a fungus disease or whatever comes in and that species is vulnerable, it will wipe out all of the crop. So we need to think about being more variety about what we do in that case. So this is the case of the Irish potato famine in 1845 and 1853, and something like 1 million people in Ireland died or were relocated because of just the lack of food that occurred. And it was a species of fungus very similar to the same family as Phytophthora, which affects jarrah trees here as well. Okay. So what are the threats to biodiversity we should be aware of? And And this, we need this understanding because it can have an impact in terms of project assessment of the EIA. The Australian government has identified these as the key threats to biodiversity. Climate change, invasive species like weeds, but also in the marine environment would be pest species as well. Loss, fragmentation, degradation of habitat, as for those of you who know this kind of stuff, it's better to have fewer larger habitats rather than a lot of smaller ones, because you get edge effects and that kind of thing which goes on. But we get fragmentation of habitat, and therefore we get genetic specialisation occurring in a small area because they can't crossbreed, therefore we get inbreeding and all those kind of loss of habitat, loss of species because of that. Overuse of natural resources, what we might protect, for example, forest areas. If we overexploit them, then that becomes a threat as well. Changes to the aquatic environment, water flows is an example of that, particularly when we do things like dam rivers or what have you. We're seeing, particularly in places like the southwest, where more and more vineyards are going in. They require a fair bit of water in dams to irrigate those during summer. It's stopping the flow of water naturally, which occurs. We see that in places, of course, like Murray-Darling, where it used to flood probably every year at the Coorong, and then with more and more extraction of water for irrigation, what have you, it's the exception that it flows out to the mouth of the road these days rather than the common thing. Fire regimes is a tricky one to deal with because we're seeing fire being used more and more in the management of our forests. It's a tricky one because it's a balance between protecting property and protecting natural ecosystems. If you change your fire regime, you burn more often, or you burn in, as we do here, we tend to burn in the spring months where the ground is still wet, rather than having hot fires, which is what our forests are used to. What they're used to is few but very hot fires which occur during summer. What we're doing instead is we're having many cooler type burns, wet burns in springtime. That's changing the ecosystem. But we do that to protect our property because people live in these areas, and therefore there's that kind of pressure going on all the time on how we manage our fires. If you add to that a growing population in Australia, we're looking at doubling our population in Perth by 2055, but Australia-wide, I think we clicked over 23 million people 2 or 3 days ago, and we're looking at a population of 30 million people. So we're increasing our population, therefore we'll take up more space for houses and what have you, for the urban areas, but also to feed ourselves as well. So they're all putting pressure onto our resources. Put it in a bigger perspective, from a global perspective, if you look at some figures we've got here, 12% of the nearly 10,000 bird species are threatened with extinction. 25% of the plant species are estimated to be threatened with extinction, so a quarter of that. And we're losing 1,000 species of plants and animals every year, which is between 100 to 1,000 times above so-called background levels. So it's quite significant what's happening here. So not surprising that in 2010 the UN decided to have a year of biodiversity, was to start addressing those issues. And as I said to you before, 1 in 4 drugs originally came from our plants which were discovered. So some of the global threats that we have, clearly clearing in developing countries so they can export the wood, or clearing the forest for farmland, and also not just for feed itself, but for producing things like coconut oil for the biofuel industry as well. That's a big threat as well. Habitat changes in Western Australia, you can actually see quite an interesting change. This is a management effort by the Department of Environment Conservation to change it from here to this sort of thing here, so taking out some of the tree species which you can't harvest, and so you tend to get more of a single species of jarrah in that forest there. It's a management practice, and you can see invasion of species going on there as well. Overexploitation, an example here of overexploitation of farmland and how you get fair amounts of erosion occurring if you overexploit that as well. Pollution has an impact on us, as most of you probably know anyway, in terms of nutrient impact into our wetlands. It causes algal blooms. This is a green bloom, which is not too bad, but blue-green bloom would be much worse. And invasive species, this is the impact of Phytophthora dieback in the forest down near the Corongraphs. You can see all the dead trees there as well, the impact that it has there as well. And of course climate change is one of those big issues which is potentially has an impact, and this is, it can lead to, as the oceans warm, it can lead to bleaching of coral reefs rather than being looking like that actually as well. So we move now from a global to an Australian perspective, and thing about Australia is that we're actually, our ecology is unique because we've been an island for 20 million years and we've developed differently. We have between 600 and 700,000 species, many of which are not found elsewhere in the world because we're an island in that regard. 84% of our plants are only found in Australia, 83% of our mammal species, like these guys can't move, therefore they stay here and evolve and what have you. And not surprisingly, fewer birds, but nearly half of our bird species are unique to Australia in that regard. And 90% of our frogs are unique. 80% of our nearshore fish species, again, because they are less mobile, are Australia only. So you can see then that we have particular, I guess, importance in protecting our biodiversity in that regard there. And then there are what we call the, I guess, the known unknowns. At least 75% of our native species remain undiscovered or undescribed. So 3/4, we think, of the species that is out there have yet to be discovered and studied. So, and that makes it really interesting when you're dealing with new mines in the Pilbara and those sort of places in the Kimberleys, because you simply don't know what's out there. And I think I gave an example of EIA in one of the lectures, and I think the last lecture talked about that as well. 45% of our land mass, so nearly half, has yet to be surveyed, so we simply don't know this kind of stuff. Okay, so let's talk about EIA now and sort of things we need to consider. That there are global influences on our, I guess, our biodiversity and how that impacts on the EIA decision making. The first of these is World Heritage Convention, which Australia has signed, and it lists sites of both cultural and natural value importance. Obviously important for us in the EIA because it is environmental and natural heritage ones as well. There was also agreements about protecting migratory species, in particular things like birds and crustaceans from here, and less important, I guess, for us here is the management of that carbon in the South Pacific region as well. There is also agreements about trade with wildlife and pollution control, but again, it's really these first couple here that are the ones that are most important to the EIA. Some of the World Heritage sites, and there are some in Australia, particularly Grand Canyon, Galapagos, Egypt, the Acropolis in Athens, Stonehenge, of course, Great Barrier Reef, Kakadu, and of course Shark Bay in Western Australia. Look at some of these sites. Okay, so a lot of these are cultural sites, like Acropolis in Greece, or Athens, Stonehenge, of course. This is a medieval castle in Portugal. And I guess it's interesting from that perspective, that just as a bit of a side issue, that World Heritage listing does have an impact on not only the country's decision making, but their economy as well. This is actually, this is in Portugal. Having a World Heritage site is really important for them from an economic perspective because it attracts people. You can see the tourists here climbing all over this castle here. But can you see that Portugal simply can't afford to manage these things properly? This is incredibly dangerous. There are no handrails. They simply can't afford to put handrails in here with quite narrow steps. I mean, there's a risk here that people are going to fall and injure themselves and all that kind of thing. But also, importantly, is the fact that these people are actually walking on this World Heritage. Now, it's a kind of difficult decision, and this comes up in looking at natural areas as well. This decision about whether you allow people to have access to that, they should experience these important natural and cultural areas, but it's also a management issue as well, how many people you should allow and what sort of control to put in place in that regard as well. Porto in Portugal is the whole central area is World Heritage listed, and you can see how all these old buildings here as well, and it makes it quite difficult for development. You simply can't knock these things down. Once you are World Heritage listed, you can't knock stuff down, and you can see from an environmental perspective as well. Once it's World Heritage listed, then you have the government has an obligation to protect and manage these things. And this is the whole debate which is going on in Tasmania about tar mine, and which I will talk about in another lecture. Okay, so again, Porto in Portugal, you can see some of the older buildings here as well. And one of the problems they have is that there isn't the wealth to actually to renovate these buildings, which is kind of interesting because it kind of works at the social level as well. That these become affordable housing for people to live in Portugal because no one can afford to actually do them up. Therefore, they sit there and but they get occupied by low-income people as well. And some areas get tarred up quite nicely. And what happens is you can see here that all the middle class who have a bit of money, instead of going into the inner areas and redeveloping, they can't afford afford it, so they're all living in brand new apartments surrounding the central part of the city. So while the central part is decaying because of the restrictions of World Heritage, the outer parts are actually moving quite nicely. In Australia, of course, Cradle Mountain is a World Heritage area, highly significant from a tourist perspective, but doesn't require some careful management. Shark Bay in Western Australia is World Heritage listed, and further up the coast, Ningaloo, I think some of those been listed just recently. So in terms of the EIA, what are the implications of World Heritage listing? It's a natural area. First of all, it's an assumption of no loss. That whatever development takes place, if at all, has to be not only sympathetic with the values of the World Heritage List area, there should be no loss of value in that area. So it needs to be sympathetic in that regard. Okay, that's World Heritage. Not that many sites, but every now and then they will come up in that regard. Treaties, there are more sites subject to treaties. For example, Ramsar wetland sites. Ramsar, if you don't know, is a town in Iran where a treaty was signed in the mid-70s, I think early 70s, to protect habitats of migratory waterbirds. This is a vast water system just to the north, I think, of Busselton, and it's quite close to the town, and it's a very important habitat for waterbirds, as is Roebuck Bay, just south of Broome. You can see the number of birds there. The whole 80-mile beach area there is important. Interesting is sort of the impacts it has. When there was a proposal for a new airport site, those of you who know Brisbane Airport's actually in the middle of town, there was a proposal for an airport outside of town, and one of the key issues was, in fact, bird disturbance associated with Roebuck Bay here. And so the design and the layout, the flight path, and the takeoff and landing direction of the airport was determined by not disturbing this area here. And that was done not just from an environmental perspective to protect the birds, but also from a health and safety perspective as well. You don't want a lot of birds taking off, and when a plane is landing and taking off, so it gets stuck. Birds get caught in the engine, and there's all sorts of problems occur because of that. In Perth, we've got a number of Ramsar sites. Thompson's Lake here, so we have CBDs up here to Woodland Point. We have Thompson's Lake and Forestdale Lake here, are both Ramsar sites for wetlands. Interestingly, Thompson's Lake is pretty well protected. It's got a nice little buffer around it. Lake Forestdale is not, and what you can see is urban encroachment starting to occur down here. What that means is that from an EIA perspective, that it's likely that not every urban development, as it gets closer to Thompson's Lake, will be assessed by the EPA, but they've done some strategic work and working with the planners to look at managing drainage from urban development. So there should be no direct drainage in or out of Lake Forestdale as urban starts to encroach down here. Instead, it goes into, you can see it there, for instance, Southern River instead of going into Lake Forestdale. So it does constrain the way in which urban development occurs. So Ramsar, similar sort of issues here, no direct loss, so you won't have any direct impact on these wetlands, but clearly development is sympathetic with those values. Bit of a problem, as Busselton, for example, expands and encroachment on areas there as well. But different from World Heritage, you have catchment management issues with Ramsar wetlands. So they have their catchments, so the catchment has to be managed as well as the direct impacts as well, in terms of nutrients and drainage in and out. And as I said to you before, bird disturbance becomes an important issue. I mentioned Broome, but also Busselton Airport was also constrained by that as well. Okay, internationally, and this is significant for Western Australia, there are Conservation International, which is an NGO conservation group, has identified 34 hotspots, which are areas which are of high biodiversity, but are under threat, largely because of clearing. And you'll notice that there's also 15 national hotspots in WA, 5 of those 15, I should say, are in WA. You can see, interestingly, is the whole southwest, pretty much from Exmouth all the way down to Esperance, is a international hotspot. And that's kind of like extension of the argument we talked about with Australia being an island, being quite isolated. This area, southwest here, is like an island within Australia itself, because you've got a desert region separating this sort of Mediterranean type climate for Western Australia. So the southwest is a highly biodiverse area and recognised internationally. Just to the side, as you can see, New Zealand, the whole of New Zealand has been identified there as well. Okay, so what does it mean for EIA? And when a proposal comes up and it impacts on vegetation, we can get our head around the fact that if it's a national park or national reserve, we should probably say no to it. But what about vegetation outside those areas? Okay, we need to have some sort of standards for this. V standards, there's a V, we should be there. These are the numbers we use nationally and state level as well for the targets for biodiversity protection. The first one is this 30% conservation goal. What that means is we identify all the major ecosystems and we want to conserve 30% of all of those. Those ecosystems which are below the 30% goal, any impact on that, on an example of that, will likely be should get a no from the EIA. For ecosystems above the 30%, clearing of that vegetation should be acceptable. It's an agreement by state and Commonwealth governments. So this 30% goal is really important. There is a caveat to that, and that is that in the metropolitan areas we often can't get that 30%. So in urban areas we go with 10%. I'll give you an example of one for a minute about something below that 10%. In Western Australia, we talk about complexes as the basis for ecosystem conservation. And what's the basis of that? Okay, if you look at Perth, this is a kind of a map of Perth showing the main landforms for the Swamp Coastal Plain. I won't go into details about this, but Darling Scarp is approximately here, and what we've got west of there is a series of sand dunes which are of marine origin. Going back, the oldest probably about 2 or 3 million years, the youngest being in the coast here. So we have a series of sandy sand dunes on which make up the Swamp Coastal Plain. And these Swamp Coastal Plains are quite common worldwide. So they're very, very sandy in that regard. But you can see that from those landforms perspective, there are 4 distinct types of landforms. They'll go from to the coast, the youngest to the oldest. The youngest ones are the ones, the so-called Bindler, or sacred-based sands here. It's Bindler dunes, and these are the ones we typically see at the coast. So they're the youngest of the sand dunes. Then, and they actually sit on top of an older one, which is the so-called spearwood. The 2 types of spearwood we have, and typically either yellow sand or limestone. And again, it's a little lecture on landforms. It's just trying to give you an overview. So typically limestone or yellow sand. And then we have this area here, which is the gutless basaldine sand. They're the stuff you find in the eastern part of Swamp Coastal Plain. Grey, white sand, which are highly bleached. And then what we find is that on the east part of the Swamp Coastal Plain, we get a runoff from the scar. These red areas here are effectively floodplains from watercourses and floods. So what we have is alluvial deposits sitting over top of massive sands over here. So we have those 4 broad landforms. The youngest coastal ones, which are typically the coast, the spearwood, which typically involves yellow sand, limestone, and then we have basaldine dune here, and then we have the alluvials over the top there. And they form the basis of the ecosystems that we have. I'm hoping that Laura's isn't going to ruin this lecture. If it does, I'm going to have to redo this part where the laws actually start. We'll see how we go. So here are the main complexes in the Swamp Coastal Plain. Look, this is not stuff which is examinable, so don't sweat on this, but to give you an idea. So we have a Bindler, spearwood, and there's 3 large different types. Basaldine, so-called Jarrah, which sits over top of that. And if you look at the percent remaining, which is really important. So how much is left uncleared by post-European settlement? 48% from Bindler, spearwood 20%, 7% is, so the spearwood ones are above the 10%. Basaldine not bad, but look at the Jarrah one here. Only 6% remains. That's below the 10% threshold. So what it therefore means is pretty much, based on that, if a proposal came up to clear vegetation on the east part of the Swan Coast Plain, so Jarrah, that would likely be a no from the EPA, and that wouldn't be for residential development or for agricultural purposes. Clean run system looks typically like that. I want you to go into detail what it looks like, or either a very kind of low forest, or typically sand dune, which looks like that in the coast. Spearwood, dominated forest, which has some benches in it, or we can see chua trees in the spearwood system. So quite a tall forest there. Sometimes with a limestone, it's actually near the surface. You can see you don't get the same sort of vegetation, high vegetation, because of the very low depth of soils. So you get the bushy stuff there as well. And then you go to the basin dunes, so going from west to east here, you can see the gutless grass soils here. Typically dominated by most of the Lancashire species there. Then we enter the Jarrah Plain, it's pretty flat, alluvial soils, and where it's not cleared, very, very thick peat, high vegetation which occurs there. And in springtime, it's pretty spectacular with the flowers, it's very, very diverse. But again, only 6% of this remains, therefore any proposal impact that would likely be a no. The metropolitan area, we have this thing called bush forever, which I won't go into any great detail with you, but it is a government document which identifies the areas of bushland of the Swan Coast Plain and Perth metropolitan area, which should be protected against development. It is state government endorsed and only protects regionally significant bushland, not locally significant bushland. And what it does is it balances environmental, social and economic objectives in that regard. While it's not a statutory document, it is policy and it's government policy, so it has a great deal of weight in that regard. There are 4 or 5 different types of bush forever sites, so the so-called reserves ones. They're already reserved or will be reserved, so they're fine. Then there's the rural areas where there will be limited development of land in those areas, so will stay in private ownership. And the so-called negotiated planning solution sites, which are the ones which are in the middle of the urban area. Often they're already zoned in the sense that they are already zoned for residential purposes. And what will happen is that they will negotiate an outcome in that regard. Some development will be allowed, but it will be negotiated. And that map just shows you all the areas which are in sort of pink colour, which are the bush forever sites. So in effect then, this is kind of like the crown jewels of the Perth metropolitan area. And if planners are thinking about developing any of these sites here, then and they refer to the EIA, it's almost likely to be a no. So quick no. Just a bit more close look at this is Perth, this is both Kings Park, Lesbian Lake, and so on, Bold Park, Royal Park. This is an example of a negotiated planning solution site. The whole of the site is a bush forever site. And what's happened is that in part of the negotiation process, this is what's happened. There's an existing reserve site here, B, which is this area here. There is some provision for development, but the rest of it will be set aside for bush forever. This local reserve here will be for conservation, and this area here will be proposed conservation. So what's happening is that this area here will be protected for conservation, and these areas here will be allowed for development. And so it was a negotiated outcome involving plans and developments. There's an emerging issue in biodiversity in WA, in Australia, in fact, which impacts the EIA, which is the so-called, going from the complexes down to what we call the ecological communities now, which is the next level down from that. These are assemblages which are a particular type of habitat, and so they're a bit more detailed than the ecosystem levels. These are of particular importance to the Commonwealth Government, and they're caught up in these BCM stuff there. So, if that's what a complex looks like, then these are what the communities look like, a bit more detailed. So these two communities are within that same complex, and that's a bit confusing. I mean, again, it's not examinable, but I'm trying to give you a sense of this. So that's a quiddler complex, and you break it down even further and more microscopic, you get these different communities within that particular complex. Some of those are what we call threatened ecological communities, and these are the ones that are most interest to the Commonwealth. And also, I guess, to the state as well, but certainly the Commonwealth. So-called TECs, threatened ecological communities. These are things that will trigger the EPBC Act, and if it's also of interest to the EPA, it will also be one of those sort of no issues as well. These are communities which are at high risk of extinction. The examples in WA shrublands and woodlands at the eastern part of the Swan Coastal Plain. This is the Guildford complex we talked about, but also within that, individual communities, and so-called sedgelands, the Holocene dunes of the southern Swan Coastal Plain. These are the things around Port Kennedy goes down near Rockingham Way as well. So these are the shrublands and woodlands in the Swan Coastal Plain. You can see different communities here. This is all one complex. You can see a shrubland and a woodland there, both of which are terrific ecological communities, but they make up the same complex. And this is what the sedgelands, it's a kind of small wetland within the Holocene dunes, which are down here, as I said, down here. I guess to kind of broaden this out, that the wheat belt is moving away now from this part there to the wheat belt. This is a particular problem for managing biodiversity. This actually photograph points out very, very clearly. There are places there where there's simply no vegetation remaining, or very small pockets of it. And there's places here that pretty much basically bugger all left. It's this area which has become a particular concern to the EPA, I guess, in the late 90s. And looking closely, you can see not only is it highly cleared, you can see sulphur in the areas as well. So there's a direct connection between clearing vegetation and salinity as well. But I will talk about that in a bit more detail, the wheat belt, when I talk about vegetation, regulations, including vegetation regulations. I just want to point it out to you that the wheat belt is a special case, that if you go back to it, you can pretty much see that looking at that, you've got to think that it's well below the 30% threshold, Commonwealth threshold, and almost certainly below the urban area 10% threshold, which means that this is the case that the EPA arrived at a conclusion that further clearing of the wheat belt was unacceptable. And that there was a big debate about that, which I'll go into some detail later with you. So, to summarise then, EIA, particularly WA, but what it means for biodiversity. If you have development which affects complexes poorly reserved, so below the 30% or 10% threshold, it's likely to get a no from the EPA. In the next block here, it's the East Swan Coastal Plain areas which are the most vulnerable. They're the ones which are below the 10%, well up and truly below that. And it's that 30 and 10% rule which the EPA applies. It has a different rule for benthic habitats, and I will cover that in another lecture. The long and short of the benthic habitat rule is it's almost a flip of that. That the cumulative loss of benthic habitat has to be no more than 10%. In other words, they're looking at a 90% retention of benthic primary producing habitats in that regard. And as I said to you, the agricultural region then shines well below the 30%, which means effectively there's a ban on clearing in those areas there. And there's also the issue about habitats where species, the fauna, which gets used in impact assessment. I'll give you a case study example, which is, and I guess I'll finish with this one from here. This is a proposal, it doesn't look like much, it's a proposed extension to an existing, so it's an existing transport depot. This is a proposed extension to it in Great Northern Highway. But it happens to be within the catchment of the short-necked tortoise habitat. Short-necked tortoises are the rarest species. They are that too. Also, I think of reptile species, probably that. Anyway, in the world. And their numbers are declining dramatically. And these numbers here are individuals. And there are two nature reserves where they exist. Ellenbrook Nature Reserve and Twin Swans. And these are numbers, not of adults. These are not, that is 20,000. This is actual numbers. And so the numbers have been declining for a long time. Short-necked tortoises happen to be incredibly specialised species. Their habitat is very specialised. They're not particularly adaptable. Flock camp there, not particularly adaptable. And as when you clear their habitat, they cannot adapt to a new one. And the EPA produced an EPP, an environmental protection policy, to protect the remaining habitat of the short-necked tortoise. And this is what it came up with. These are the two remaining known habitats, both with the nature reserves. And drew a line around here and effectively said that any property within that cadastral line is effectively within the catchment of these two habitats, and therefore it was concerned about intense development occurring there. So it actually effectively said that the maximum lot size in this area, I think, is 8 hectares. You cannot subdivide below 8 hectares. And when you can see how close this area is to Ellenbrook here as well, and there's a fair bit of pressure for urban development. But the concern is that if you have full-blown urban development, or even lower than 8 hectare subdivision, that you'll get increased runoff, increased nutrients and pollutants, which ends up into these two nature reserves. These are on the clay soils of the eastern part of the Swamp Coastal Plain. So there's a high restriction. This particular example we're talking about here, this case study is within that area. Here it is. There is, so there's a nature reserve here as well, and this is the proposed site there. The proposal is, there's already a transport depot on the site there already. It was constructed, the existing one was constructed without approval from anyone. The guy just did it. And it was almost like he knew if he put an application, he wouldn't get approval for the existing transport depot. He wants to now expand it, and it got referred to the EPA. So the original one was not actually referred to the EPA, even though it was in the EPP area where the EPA was said no to go. Concerns about it is about change of hydrology and water quality are the key issues, therefore the impact on the habitat. So here is the existing stand area here, so he wants to increase by about 120% the size of that. So arguably it's not a particularly big proposal, but it is within that sensitive habitat. What the EPA said, that in some of the proposed represents an unacceptable long-term risk to the Western Swamp Taurus and the Ellenbrook Nature Reserve. Essentially, this is an incompatible land use adjacent to a high value conservation area. Having particular regard of the long-term risk of water quality and the importance of those two nature reserves, it's the EPA's opinion that the proposal cannot meet the EPA's objective, therefore it actually said no to it. So this was a quick no. APIB effectively is what it was. It gave some additional advice. I won't go into a lot of detail, but EPA's advice that the existing transport depot, which has hard stand on the site, was built prior to the proponent taking necessary approval. Under the EP Act, it's an offence for any person to do a proposal. So basically what it's saying is that this guy has broken the law and should be prosecuted for building the original one. Okay, so that was a case study then, a particular case study which was a quick note that was to do with a particular species which is under threat. So what I've done therefore in this particular part of the lecture is talked about giving you a kind of policy background to biodiversity and to get an understanding of how it works for the EIA, why biodiversity is important, how we categorise biodiversity in terms of complexes, communities and individual species. The magic numbers for complexes is that 30% outside metro and 10% within metro. And those numbers are important